Hi, my name is Teddy Nykel, and today we're going to be talking about 5 ways to be a smart student loan borrower. I am a journalist with more than 7 years of experience covering personal finance and specifically student loans. You may have seen my work on nerdwallet.com, in USA Today, or via the Associated Press. I also work with my college planning team to help families make a plan to pay for college affordably. So let's dive in. The first step to being a smart student loan borrower is understanding the difference between federal versus private student loans. These are the 2 main types of student loans you're going to encounter, and we recommend always going with federal student loans first. These are the student loans that you get when you fill out the FAFSA, which we recommend filling out every single year you're in college. And there are several benefits to doing federal student loans compared to private student loans. For example, federal student loans have a program where you can repay them based on a percentage of your income. These are called income-driven repayment plans, and these help your monthly payments be more affordable, especially when you're just starting out after college. If you're not earning a lot right away, they can really help make those payments more affordable. Forgiveness is also an option for some borrowers when it comes to federal student loans, but that's not an option for private student loans. The main forgiveness program to be aware of is called Public Service Loan Forgiveness. And under that program, if you work for the government or a qualifying nonprofit for 10 years while making payments, but on an income-based plan, you can potentially have the remainder of your loan balance forgiven after those 10 years. Federal student loans do not require a credit check for undergraduate students. So that means that undergraduate students can take them out without having to have their parents co-sign for them. With private student loans, there is a credit check needed, and oftentimes an 18-year-old undergraduate student doesn't have the credit history required, and so they need their parent to co-sign for them. But with federal student loans, students can take them out completely in their own name because there's no credit check. There is a credit check required for PLUS loans, which are for graduate students and parents. I should also add that everything I'm talking about right now applies to both student loans as well as parent loans. And parent loans are available for parents who need extra money to help their children, pay for college. With federal student loans, interest rates are set annually by Congress, and everyone who takes out a student loan in a given year gets the same interest rate. By contrast with private student loans, interest rates are based on your credit. So if you have a good credit, you could potentially get a very low interest rate, but if you have bad credit, your interest rate could be very high with a private student loan. But again, with federal student loans, you have one interest rate for the life of your loan, and I'm going to go into more details about that later on in the presentation. Finally, there are some borrowing limits for federal student loans, which is why private student loans essentially exist. You may be thinking, if there are so many benefits to federal student loans, why would I even consider private loans? The answer is because there are some limits to the amount of federal student loans you can borrow, but we're going to get into that in a little bit. There are multiple different types of federal and private student loans. As I mentioned, parent loans are also available. There are actually federal parent loans, which are known as Parent Plus loans, and there are private parent loans as well. With federal loans, the main federal student loan program is called the Direct Loan Program, but you also might see it called the Stafford Loan Program. And there are subsidized and unsubsidized direct or Stafford loans. I'll go into more details about that in a little bit, but if you can qualify for subsidized loans, those are the ones you want to go with. As I mentioned also, there are also PLUS loans, which are for parents and grad students, and I'll share more details about that coming up. So as I mentioned, there are borrowing limits for federal student loans. For dependent undergraduate students, which is kind of the typical undergraduate student, 18-year-old that you think of, in their first year of college, they can borrow up to $5,500 in year 1. That is including subsidized and unsubsidized loans, and only $3,500 of that is subsidized. The rest would be unsubsidized, or all of it would be unsubsidized depending on your financial aid package. The limit goes up a little bit every year for students. So in their second year, they can take up to $6,500, and in their third year and every year after that, they can take up to $7,500. There are higher borrowing limits for independent undergraduate students who don't have the help of their parents when paying for college, as well as graduate students, and dependent students whose parents aren't eligible for PLUS loans. For Parent PLUS loans and Grad PLUS loans, the limit is your cost of attendance minus any other financial aid you qualify for, which means that the limit is essentially a lot higher for Parent and Grad PLUS loans. So if you max out the federal borrowing limits for an undergraduate student, your options are to either have your parent take out a Parent PLUS loan or consider private student loans. Private student loans, the limits are similar to the PLUS loans in that the borrowing limit is generally the school's cost of attendance minus other financial aid. So for example, say a school's cost of attendance is $50,000 per year. That includes tuition as well as living costs and other fees associated with going to college. So that's $50,000 a year. Say that you qualify for $20,000 in other types of federal student aid and financial aid. That means that there's $30,000 left. You could potentially borrow up to $30,000 in private loans or Parent PLUS loans. Number 3 is a really important rule of thumb to keep in mind. You want to keep your debt proportional to your future earnings. That's because college is an investment in your future, but it only pays off if your future career that you get as a result of going to college will allow you to affordably pay off your student loans. So, as a way to think about this, we recommend that your estimated post-graduation income should not exceed the total amount you borrow. So, for example, say you expect to earn $50,000 in your first year after college, and that's about average. So if you're unsure, that's a good ballpark to just use as an example. You want to try to limit all of your student loan borrowing to $50,000 or less. That amount is going to make it so that your future monthly payments will hopefully be manageable for you on your future salary. Just to give you an idea, if you did borrow $50,000 in student loans, you would owe about $555 a month, assuming your interest rate was around 6%. It would be a slightly higher or lower depending on your interest rate, but that's calculated based on a 10-year repayment plan, which is the standard repayment plan for federal student loans. If you're paying $550 a month and you're earning $50,000 a year, that means you're putting about 17% of your salary towards your student loan payments. Any more than that would start to get unaffordable to the point where it might be difficult to afford rent or other living expenses. And so in order to keep it affordable and keep your debt in check, this is kind of the rule of thumb that we recommend. Somewhat along these lines, what I always like to recommend to people is that you can say no to student loans. So you should only take out the amount of student loans that you need to pay for your tuition, your fees, and your living expenses while in college. After you fill out the FAFSA, you'll get a financial aid award letter, and it will offer you a certain amount of student loans. You don't have to say yes to all of that. You can tell the college how much you want to take out in student loans, and I recommend doing the math for yourself in order to figure out exactly how much you need. So for example, say you're taking out some additional student loans in order to pay for your living expenses. The school will actually estimate how much they think it will cost you to live during college. That's included in their cost of attendance, but I recommend doing that estimation for yourself. Some schools overestimate how much it costs to live during college, and some underestimate it. And so you could end up borrowing too much if you're going off of an overestimate that the school makes. So do some research on rents in the area, do some research about how much you might need for transportation and food, and add that all up and take out enough to cover your basic living expenses. And then if there's extra money that you're offered that you don't think you'll need, say no to that. That will save you money in interest, and that will avoid you taking out too much student debt and avoid high monthly payments in the future that you can't afford. Finally, my final tip is that it's important to learn how student loan interest works. So Generally, student loan interest does accrue while you're in college. That means that when you graduate, you're going to owe more than you initially borrowed. So if you borrow $30,000 in student loans, once you graduate, you're going to end up owing more than that due to interest. There are some exceptions. I mentioned earlier subsidized student loans. They're a type of federal student loan, just to jog your memory. Subsidized federal student loans don't accrue interest while you're in school. So if you qualify for subsidized loans, take out those first because the government will pay any interest that accrues while you're in school. With unsubsidized loans and PLUS loans and private student loans, the interest starts accruing as soon as you take them out, and it again will increase the total amount that you have to pay back in the future. As I mentioned earlier, federal student loan rates are set every year, and they apply for everyone who takes out that type of student loan within a given year. So for example, for the 2020-2021 school year, interest rates for undergraduate students who take out direct subsidized or unsubsidized loans are 2.75%. This is actually a historically low interest rate for federal student loans. It's a little bit higher for graduate students who take out unsubsidized loans. For graduate students, it's 4.3%. And then for PLUS loans, which are again for parents or graduate students, the interest rate is 5.3%. Now, for private loans, I don't have anything up here because it really is credit dependent. So depending on your credit score, you'll potentially get a very high interest rate, or you could get a lower interest rate, again, depending on your credit. With federal student loans, these are set for each school year. So if you take out, say you're going to be a freshman in fall 2020, you take out a student loan at 2.75%. If you take out another loan for next year, your interest rate will be whatever Congress sets as the interest rate for that year. It could be higher, it could be lower. They announce it typically in May of each year for the following year. So what happens is that when you graduate, it's common that students have multiple different loans with different interest rates, and that reflects the different loans they took out for every year of college. Oh, just a note here that through September 30th, 2020, the interest rate on federal student loans is temporarily at 0% as part of the CARES Act, which was passed in response to the coronavirus. So interest is not accruing on federal student loans at least through September 30th. I recommend paying attention to the news because there's always ongoing developments. It's possible that this will get extended, but it's going to be at least through September 30th. And again, that's only for federal student loans. Private student loans are still accruing interest during the coronavirus pandemic. Interest can add up fast. So when it comes to repaying your student loans, as I mentioned, if interest is accruing while you're in college, you're gonna owe more than you originally borrowed. There is a benefit of a grace period, so you don't have to start making payments on your federal student loans, and often this is typically true of private student loans as well, until 6 months after you leave college or graduate. So if you graduate in May, you typically don't have to pay your student loans until November. However, when you have to start making payments, you're paying all of the interest that accrues in the meantime. So interest does also accrue during your grace period, except on those subsidized loans, as I mentioned. There's one more complicating factor, and that is called capitalization. So capitalization is when unpaid interest gets added to your principal balance, and then future interest gets charged on top of that. So for example, I'm going to go to example on this next slide. Say you take out $27,000 in unsubsidized federal student loans over 4 years, and say your average interest rate is 4.45%. Again, your interest rate might be slightly different every year. Over those 4 years, your loans would accrue more than $3,000 of interest while you're in school, and that will get added to your balance when your loans enter repayment. So instead of owing $27,000 plus interest, you now owe $30,350 I'm sorry, $30,357, which adds up to $315 a month. More interest will continue accruing on that balance until you pay off the loan. Generally, as I mentioned, it takes 10 years to pay off a federal student loan. So over those 10 years, you would end up paying more than $37,000 or nearly $11,000 in total interest. Now, let's say that instead of letting that interest capitalize or get added to your balance, you pay off that $3,357 of interest before your grace period ends. That would save you $30 a month and $750 total. So the moral of the story is either paying interest while you're in school or making a lump sum payment on all of the interest that has accrued before you enter repayment is a great option, a great way to shave a little bit of interest off the total amount of interest you're going to be paying. So just to summarize, our 5 ways to be a smart student loan borrower is understand federal versus private loans and generally go for those federal student loans. Keep your debt proportional to your expected future earnings. Again, remember that rule of thumb, you don't want to borrow more than about your expected future salary in student loans. Third, know the federal student loan borrowing limits. Unfortunately, for all the benefits of federal student loans, there are limits to the amount that you can borrow. Return or say no to student loans you don't need. Do the math for yourself, figure out how much you need for tuition and living expenses, and only borrow that amount. And finally, learn how student loan interest works and learn some strategies to help avoid paying extra interest. I hope that was helpful. I know a lot of you might still have questions because paying for college is really confusing. And so I want to let you know about an opportunity. My college planning team offers free 1-hour consultations. This is an opportunity to meet with a financial aid expert and get all of your questions answered. So if you want to learn more and sign up, you can go to mycollegeplanningteam.com/contact/free-consultations. You'll see it right there. And you can sign up, learn more about what is included in that 1 hour, what you'll get out of it, and also select a time and sign up right there online. Thank you so much for joining us and have a great day.